Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm joined by Mark Drury for a masterclass on all things related to wind and its impact on hunting mature bucks. All right, welcome back to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and their Camo for Conservation initiative. Today, we have an absolute gem of an episode. I'm joined by the one and only, the mad scientist himself, Mark Drury. Some of our very best episodes of this podcast ever over the long history of this show have been with Mark Drury. He is a wealth of information. He's a terrific educator and communicator about deer and deer hunting. If you haven't listened to our past episodes with him, go ahead and do that. If you want to have a true, deep, mind-blowing whitetail experience leading up to your next hunt, go and binge listen to some of our past episodes. Episode 63, which was our first one with him about predicting deer movement. I've listened to it so many times and had so many people reference it that I can just think of it off the top of my head. Episode 63 is one. We have a follow-up to that about predicting deer movement. I think that's called like a masterclass on predicting deer movement. That one's maybe even better because it just gets right into the meat and potatoes of that. We did an amazing episode recently about patterning deer. We did another really good one about everything he thinks about in the moment of truth and right after shots. So just go and Google Wired to Hunt, Mark Drury, and listen to those past episodes. And then, or maybe right after what we're about to do today, listen to this one because this is on that same level. Today is a masterclass with Mark Drury on wind. And there's maybe nothing more important to hunting mature deer, to hunting deer of any age or type than wind, because their number one survival tool is their nose. And if you can't beat their nose, you can't kill them. That's what it comes down to. Today, we discuss exactly how Mark Drury uses his understanding of wind and a deer's nose to close the distance and fill tags. So we are going to ask him, or I do ask him, so many ridiculously nitty-gritty questions about the impacts of thermals, barometric pressure, how that impacts wind and thermals, how deer use thermals, how we as hunters can use thermals, how terrain features impact thermals, how ditches and rivers and creeks and ponds impact wind and thermals. We talk through how deer use the wind to make decisions about where they bed, how they approach their bed, how they decide where they might go feed during the evening, where they go feed in the evening, how they use wind during the rut, how they use wind to scent check, how Mark thinks about all of this when choosing where to hunt on any given night, or how to account for the risk of being winded when deciding where to hunt. This is fascinating stuff. If you are a whitetail geek like I am, this episode is going to be right up your alley. I'm just going to get right into it. I think we should jump into this episode as fast as possible because it is a banger. It's full of information. It will help you on your very next hunt. I guarantee it. So thanks for tuning in. Enjoy this chat with Mark Drury. Make sure to go check out those past episodes that we did with him. They are terrific as well. And best of luck on your next hunt. All right, with me on the line now is the one and only mad scientist, Mr. Mark Drury. Welcome back to the show, Mark.
Hi, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm great. I got to tell you, I'm very appreciative of the fact that you made time for this amidst the first big cold front of the year. So thank you for that.
You know, there's some benefits to not hunting a lot of mornings, and this is one of them. So
Yeah.
we had a late night, as I indicated via my text last night. So we were not getting the stand this morning, no matter what.
Yeah. So the first cold front, it turned out pretty well for you?
It did. We went with 3 different crews last night, 1 in Iowa, 2 in Missouri. I was filming Taylor in Missouri. Coondog and Wade were out together in Missouri. And then Carson and Darren were in Iowa. And I really felt like, with running 3 crews, we would see some mature deer on their feet. Taylor and I did not. We had a good sit in terms of seeing deer, but nothing with any age. Darren and Carson, the same. Deer numbers, decent, but no age. And then Wade and Coondog have a deer that we've never seen while hunting. They were targeting him, And we needed that win yesterday. And he walks out at 6'10", and Wade gets a shot at 12 or 13 yards and smokes this, what we estimate to be at least a 7.5-year-old deer. Because last year, this was a farm that I had purchased after selling a couple other farms. And we put a lot of effort into the setup of this farm and the production therein. And we featured it within deer season 24 quite a bit. And Wade ended up taking a really nice deer on that farm, but not this number one target. We felt like he was the oldest deer on the farm. We never even saw him while we were hunting, and we hunted him a good bit. And based on the trail picture history I had with him, we really narrowed down, this is where he daylights the most. He's got to be bedding out this one finger ridge. There's a bunch of oaks in there, and there's a lot of acorns there this year. I'm sure you have a good mass crop as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we just needed a north wind to get in there, which anybody listening, if you've hunted from mid-September through early October, that those have been rare. And finally, we got one last night, and this guy walks out. He's just a big, what we think is at least a 7.5-year-old deer, a mainframe 9-point with a kicker, and giant body. I mean, the neck on this deer, I'll have to show you a picture. I don't know if you can B-roll this or not, but look at the neck on that deer.
Ooh. Jeez.
We didn't
I
measure
love when
it.
you can see those big skin rolls, even when he's not bent.
That looks like a November deer,
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty sure he's at least 6.5 or 7.5 rather. We thought he was 6.5 last year, but there's a good shot with perspective of Wade behind him. Big Missouri deer. As far as Missouri deer go, body wise and neck, and I mean that's what you're after. They seldom get to that age, but it was cool to go into a new farm and make it happen on the second year on what was the number one target. So,
well, it's especially sweet. I don't know if you feel this way, but it does seem especially sweet to me, at least, when you have those hunts that you predict being like extra special. I think that this is going to be an extra special time because of X and Y, and I'm gonna have the perfect spot because of A, B, and C, and you have everything dialed up just right, and then it actually goes that way, which it sounds like this one did. When the whole script goes the way you write it, that doesn't happen too often, but when it does, it is a very good feeling.
A case in point, we had 3 scripts last night, all excellent spots. One script played out, and the others didn't. So there's still that numbers game with whitetail hunting, that do factor or not so do factor in a spot or a person or whatever it is. So that it can be a numbers game at times.
Yeah, that's the truth. So many people have been waiting for this cold front, which, has just hit, early this week for a lot of people. A lot of us have been dealing with warm weather. You were dealing with warm weather leading up to this, and you still were able to find some success last week, right? Can you tell me about that one?
We did. The highs were in the upper 80s every single day, and it was just really hot and lack of wind. It was just every day that was 3, 4, 5 mile an hour winds, which oftentimes are quite variable, as you know. And finally, we had a day where some clouds rolled in. I was watching DeerCast religiously, and I saw that cloud bank coming. And clouds affect deer differently in the early season versus late season, especially when it's a really hot period, and all of a sudden the clouds shield the sun and cool things off. And everything got up and moved. They were as ready for the hot weather to be over as we were. And we ended up seeing 3 different shooters that night. And we'd been sitting there because we had a good access in and out. And we'd been sitting there 5 nights. This was the 4th night in a row we had sat there. And all of a sudden, everything moved in a field that we hadn't seen a ton in. I mean, we saw movement, but not the shooters. And it just worked out on a buck that was, again, ancient, really big old buck that Taylor and I saw him once last year, but that was it. And he was actually, I went in there with a buck in mind based on trail pictures that I consider to be the target in Missouri and on that farm. And then he walks out, and this deer comes out. They kind of came out at different ends of the field, and then this deer immediately walks him off. And when they got together, the deer that I shot's body was 25% bigger, roughly. And I was like, I had this all wrong. Like, I think that deer's younger than I thought he was. And this deer walks him off, and I quickly switched my focus. Coon Dog was like, that thing's a tank, and he walked everything off the field, and then eventually came by us, and it was an easy choice when I saw his body, his head, his demeanor. He was clearly a shooter. A 9-point mainframe with a kicker out the front.
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, cool deer, beautiful deer, big deer. And again, I saw him once last year, and this was the first time I'd seen him this year. So it was a fun hunt.
So you hunted that spot. You said 4 days in a row. Is that right?
4 in a row. Yeah,
4 in a row. And you didn't have good conditions, right? It was hot. It was other than the clouds coming in.
It was awful.
So when it comes to stretches where you have that poor weather, does it come down to just finding a spot that you can hunt repeatedly because of great access and entry, so that eventually you have to count on that numbers game finally giving you a chance? If we sit this 5 lousy days in a row, but in a spot that we are not going to be detected, we might finally get them coming through. Is that the idea?
You summed it up. Had we been having poor luck with deer blowing and getting out of there on our way in or out, or while we were hunting, I would not have continued with that approach, but we weren't. So Coondog and I just kept, it's this creek that winds through the woods with a giant warm season grass field that we come down through, sneak into the creek, and then we go north along the creek, up an embankment 15 feet on a wooden ladder we built, and then into our stand. So in and out is quite easy. And we just weren't getting caught. Our thermals were dumping into that creek, and we would wait till the field would clear, and we got lucky because they stage in this area, and then they often will move on out the north end of the field and up into a bean field that's quite some distance away. So every night, the movement would occur and the field would empty, and we would get on out. So we had a little luck on our side with the way the movement is there. It's not always that way, but in this scenario, it worked for us. And then on the 5th night, 4th in a row, I got the shot because clouds moved in. What was supposed to be a high of 88 dropped to like 81 or 82, and they did it that night. And the pressure was high. That was the other reason I continued to hunt it. The pressure was bouncing between 29.95 and 30.05 all 5 of those days, specifically those 4. That's why I kept going back, because I was like, sooner or later, they're going to show here, because I had pictures of some good bucks in this area. So it was a do factor.
So you talked about something there that I would like to circle back on. It is kind of the main focus of what I was hoping to pick your brain about. I selfishly, over the years, Mark, have always come to you with like a deep burning question, usually for each one of our chats. We've done some really good ones about predicting deer movement. We've done some really good ones about patterning deer, about kind of moment of truth situations. We had a really good chat about that a few years ago. But I thought today, something you just mentioned would be perfect to kind of peel back some layers of the onion, which is everything related to wind. Like, I mean, this is like the name of the game with mature whitetails, right? They use their nose. That's their ultimate survival weapon. So as a hunter, we need to have a master's understanding of wind to combat that. And I don't know if we give it enough thought, or maybe I just don't give it enough thought, because there's the basics, and then there's these thousands of other little nuanced things. So if you would be if you'd be patient enough to hear a few of my questions on this, I'd love for you to first expand on the thermal question that you just brought out there. You mentioned the fact that you had this spot where you could drop your thermals back behind you. And I think that sometimes people assume that thermals are just something you need to worry about in really big hills, but you're hunting in, moderate terrain, I think. I know there's some topography, but it's not like
moderate.
Yeah, it's not like Virginia or Western Mountains or something, right? So how do you think about thermals with your hunts, both with how deer are using thermals and then how you think about thermals when you plan your sets?
I think, first of all, understanding thermals as the Earth's temperature cools, thermals are going down to the lowest part. That's evening. In the morning, as the surface warms up, sun comes out, those thermals start to go up and rise. And barometric pressure also helps that accentuate them going up higher and getting on out of there. If it's high pressure, if it's low pressure, think of it kind of almost not having as much of a thermal effect. It kind of squashes that top layer down and they might move up a little bit and down a little bit, but they don't have that drastic up and down that they will on a high pressure day.
Now, sorry to interject, but does it do the opposite though with a low pressure day? So with a low pressure day, would that be pushing
That's
the
what I said.
dropping thermals down? Okay,
High
so
pressure, high pressure. I think there is a much greater thermal effect, way up, way
up,
down.
going
Low
up.
pressure, I think it is much more condensed. Low pressure kind of holds everything in. You're still going to have some warming, and it'll go up in the morning and down in
Yep.
the evening. However, it's not nearly the distance that you would experience. It might be 100 feet that it's doing it, or 200 feet that it's doing it on a high pressure day. Thermals rising on up into the sky, or pushing all the way
Yep.
down to the bottom of the valley. On a low pressure day, it might only be 10, 15 feet that it affects it, but it still affects
Hmm.
it. And I could be off on those figures, but it just, in my mind, I know that it doesn't do what it does on a high pressure day. It's not
Okay.
nearly as distinct either. Like low pressure days, you just don't feel it as much, you yourself.
So do you think is that part of why you like high pressure days so much for hunting? I understand there's a factor that impacts deer movement itself, but is part of it also the fact that it's lifting your scent
I, th-
as
I,
well?
I think it kind of goes hand in hand. I think it just, the two go together. And that's one of the things when we did deer cast and we worked on all those different weather variables. Oftentimes, uh, when variables would repeat themselves, it was because a similar system was coming through. Like you get a high pressure system, northwest wind. It starts with a low, the wind gets up, it ushers the low out, the high pressure moves in. You get that one windy day, then the wind calms down, and it's kind of repetitive. So you often get things that work in concert with one another, if you will. So um, whether I like it because of that reason, not necessarily. I like high pressure days because the movement's better. It is
Yep.
probably a bonus that the thermals act in such a way that they are drastically going up in the morning and pouring downward in the evening on a high pressure day. I
Yeah.
mean, drastic evening cooling.
So is there ever a time when you will set up in a place with a given wind direction that maybe is not perfect, but you are counting on the pressure to help you accentuate a thermal to be able to get rid of something where you say, like, hey, I know this is going to be a little bit risky, but because of the high barometric pressure, and I think these bucks are coming late morning or something when the thermals start rising, I'm going to lift my air over top of them. Is that something that you are confident in enough to set up on?
Absolutely. If you're up in topography high on the ridge and your wind is not I really wish I had a north northeast today, but it's north northwest. I think I can fool these deer because of the fact that after about 7:30 or 8 o'clock, my thermals are going to be, chimneying up and out of here. And you get by with murder on high pressure days in terms of your scent. If you're high in topography and you've got a reasonably favorable wind, you get by with murder. I mean, you really do. It alleviates a lot of problems for hunters because your stuff's going up and not necessarily in the direction the wind is blowing.
Yeah. So another kind of thermal factor that I'm always wondering about is how the predominant, like the regular wind that day and the thermals interact. How much wind or how low of a wind do you need for the thermals to be the main influence of your scent versus how fast of a wind do you need to have for thermals to not really matter anymore because the actual wind is pushing your scent somewhere else?
I don't know that it matters a heck of a lot. In theory, in your mind, you think it matters a lot, but those thermals in many cases will overpower wind speed because
Mm.
regardless of wind speed, you have those ebbs and flows of a windy day, right? If you've got a call it a 17 mile an hour northwest wind, well, it's going to gust to 23 and it's going to subside down to 10, and so you still get these ebbs and flows, peaks and valleys where that thermal's still going to take over. I think thermals in many cases are as powerful or more powerful in terms of what can help you get away with fooling a deer or not fooling a deer as the wind speed and direction.
Hmm. What do you think about like the thermal effect in flat areas where there's not really significant topography and you're in relatively flat, ag land or something like that.
Same of a morning when it's warming up, it's going to go up. And in an evening, it's going to cool down and blanket things. If you don't have much of a wind speed, it's going to blanket probably in 360 degrees around your spot. Everybody can relate to sitting there waiting all day for deer 30. You were warm, sitting in your stand. The high that day was 50 degrees. All of a sudden, the sun goes down, the earth cools, you get that little chill, and the deer start moving. And then straight upwind of you, you got a deer that catches you. That's a thermal issue. You might have a 6, 7, 8 mile an hour wind, but that deer caught that thermal. Those thermals are heavy. That's the one thing about a thermal. Wind is light in terms of how much weight it has, but when that cooling effect happens, there's nothing stopping that downflow. Nothing's going to stop it. So it's a very heavy effect. Same in the morning. When you get into, 7:45, 8, 8:30 and the rapid warm up, that stuff's bellowing up into the air like a chimney and nothing's going to catch you, especially on high pressure days.
So can you walk me through how you think about that when you're setting up a place to hunt? You mentioned something earlier, but I'd love for you just to kind of explicitly explain how that factors into when you're looking at a good hunting spot, where you pick your tree or your blind location, given those two changes.
As a general rule of thumb, of a morning, I love to be higher in topography. I just absolutely love it. I will hunt low in topography, but my preference is to be somewhere on a ridge, just out of my own instinct. And of an evening, I love hunting bottoms or lower in topography. I dislike hunting a ridge of an evening unless I have something for it to fall off to. Or if I have a great wind speed that I have a confidence level that it's going to take it and dump it somewhere else. So that's just general rule of thumb. Always and never are not good words for whitetail hunters. It's more about probabilities and trying to put the odds in your favor. Last night was a great example for Wade and Coondog. That was a ridge top because that's where he would come out every evening. And we put it for a north wind with a pretty good slope going down so that A, we had the north wind, B, we had the thermal effect pushing it away from this ridge top where he was walking based on last year's trail pictures. And it worked out quite well. Although the deer gave them a curveball and came out, was walking this long ridge top that we had a green field on. And then all of a sudden, cold front, he's been walking that ridge in the green, warm weather, cold front. He did a Yui and went straight into this bean field down the bottom. Colder weather, green turned to grain. And luckily he was within range of the blind when he threw him that curveball, and Wade was able to make a great shot on him. So, and I was sitting there last night, I was in a bottom field on a green field. And I told Taylor, I was like, I just wonder if I didn't make a mistake given the severity of this cold front, and I should have sat grain, which is another general rule of thumb of mine. When it's cold, I sit close to grain. When it's warm, I sit close to green. And again, it's not always or never. It's just something I've seen tendencies where they'll do that. And luckily, Wade and Coondog got one. But, we sat that green field and we saw decent movement, but no age.
What do you think about setting up on small depressions, counting on that thermal drop, like a ditch or a creek?
Love it.
So that's something you sometimes will do?
I do it a lot. But I will say this. Sometimes they'll fool you in what those thermals will do once they get into that depression. They'll snake around and come back out and whatnot. And it really can only be proven or disproven through time. In other words, I think this is going to work, but boy, until you sit there through a variety of different temperatures, wind speeds, leaves on, leaves off, time of the year, you really don't know. I talk a lot about wind scouting, where you're also thermal scouting when you're out there. What exactly is happening to my wind? And I'm a wind checker maniac, man. I'm constantly checking it. And it freaks me out when I see it, doing all these weird different things. And I don't think you could check your wind enough when you're in a hunting situation, whether you're on your way to the stand, whether you're sitting in the stand, whether you're trying to get out of the stand. Know where it's going, because oftentimes what you feel isn't necessarily what it's doing. So through time, you find those little spots. You're like, holy cow, this worked on an east-southeast wind at 10 mile an hour. with a high of 50 degrees and pressure of above 30. You might go there the next time, leaves off, pressure lower, different wind speed, and all of a sudden it doesn't work for you. So you can only learn that through time and taking good notes and remembering the conditions that you had when it worked versus didn't work, and avoid those in the future.
Hey, speaking of, you just mentioned, oh, with such and such barometric pressure, it worked. Back to what we were talking about just a minute ago, which was the when barometric pressure is high, it will accentuate thermals. Have you found there's like a threshold? Like, how high is high for that to be the case? Have you seen anything where you can be like, oh, well, if it's over 30.2 or if it's over 30 or anything like that?
Barometric pressure is relative to the time of the year. This time of the year, 29.95 is pretty high. You know, you get to December, 29.95 is not overly high. You know, that winter air just brings in much higher pressure. And I think they almost have an internal system that reacts to the time of the year. I mean, clearly their coats change from now till December, you know, and pressure that's high now is like 29.95 to 30.1, 30.15. You get up 30.2, 30.3, you're really high. Whereas in December, you might consistently get 30.1 to 30.25, you know, and then all of a sudden you get this day where it's 30.6 or 30.7, and it's like the deer walking around with their head about to explode, you know. But you do get those wild days where really, really high barometric pressure. So it's not the same throughout the year. This time of the year, I love talking about the early season here, September and up through mid-October, 29.95, 30.05, 30.1. Right there is a real sweet spot for optimization of deer movement, in my opinion. I see a lot of deer on their feet in that pressure range.
So one last thermal-ish related curiosity I have, I guess I want to confirm some of my thoughts, would be the impacts of water. So standing water or moving water. So one thing I've always thought is if I'm in a situation where I have low and variable winds, I've always thought about trying to set up, if there's a creek or a river or something, that if I were to set up close to that water, I could have a thermal that might drop into that water or into that creek or river, and that the movement of that water, whatever the direction the river or creek is moving, would likely suck my wind down along with that. Is there any, have you seen that? Have you experienced that? I've seen that in some experiences.
I have, but I've also seen it play the opposite effect that I thought I wanted it to do, because with that river comes a flow, and almost a flow of thermalization and wind. Have you ever noticed that along a river? Like, you can stand next to it without any wind, yet you feel a flow that the water's pushing these thermals one way or the other. So again, it would only come through time that you would learn whether that works or doesn't work. The other thing that I notice around water, ponds or creeks, or especially if it's reasonably deep, you have a much more accentuated change in pressure. So that really cool water. Well, look at a pond in the morning that's warm on a cool morning. There's fog coming up off of it, right? And yet you don't see that fog anywhere else. So the temperature of that water can perhaps help you, but it could also hurt you, because it's different thermal activity in and around that body of temperature versus the grass or the ground or rocks or trees, if that makes sense. So they can be trickier around water. They may be tricky to the point that it helps you more because it's doing something very consistently, taking your thermals down into a creek and moving them on, to your example. But then again, it may have a flow to it that curls it back up on top, and a deer gets you way upwind that you didn't anticipate. You know, that's a tricky thermal pool in and around water. It's different than land.
Is there any other terrain feature or habitat feature that has a unique thermal effect? I'm wondering, like a very sunny open hillside versus a dark, cool forest. Do you ever have like a different strategy about how you're thinking about wind and thermals based on those two settings, or something else like that?
Absolutely. Again, based on the temperature of the earth, if it's cooler, as you start to have evening thermals dropping down, it's not going to be as accentuated as if it was a hot open area and those thermals go down. Thusly, you'll also see a touch of a delay in the thermals cooling that area off. Do you ever notice if you're hunting a bottom and you're walking out of it and it's really cool down in that bottom, and about halfway up that hill, boom, it's like a 10-degree difference in temperature.
Yeah.
Like it just takes much longer for that stuff that was warmed by the sun all day to cool off, as opposed to the shaded bottom where the treetops were. That's just an example. So again, I keep going back to, you only learn those things through experience as to whether something's going to work or not. And I've had spots that I stopped hunting because my thermals would get me on the way out. Like I would hunt a bottom and I'm trying to get out of a steep hill, yet this thermal's pouring in and alerting the deer that I just escaped the field from, because it's pushing my thermal down the hill from the top that's still warm, whereas in the bottom it had all equalized and my scent was on the ground. Then I started my ascent out of there, and boom, a new set of thermals is pushing me down into where they just came from. So I've had a few stands like that I just quit hunting, especially in the early season.
With all this in mind, like all these effects that the thermals are having on where our scent goes, there's a lot of theories that hunters have about how deer might be using this. What do you think about how deer are using thermals to their advantage? Have you seen like, hey, they're oftentimes going to travel to this area or in this way because of thermals? Are there any kind of rules that you've seen?
Absolutely. I think when you see a deer circling downwind to check out a calling position, or perhaps they caught movement in the tree and like, what is that? I'm going to go check that. Have you ever had a deer catch you by circling? You know what she's doing or he's doing.
Yep.
He's trying to get my position, yet they don't reach your downwind side, but they still catch you. They went down.
I'm sure it's happened.
They went down thermal as opposed to downwind. So yes, they use it as a very powerful force for them. If you catch them of an evening is when most of this happens. Of a morning, if it's a decent, warm up day, that stuff's going up and they have a much tougher time catching you. When you've got a nice day that's warming of a morning, they can circle you because they saw movement in the tree, and yet they can't detect you because everything's going straight up. But evenings, a little trickier, but they will down thermal you as quick as they will downwind you. So yes, they use them to their advantage.
What about, this is kind of getting to some of the other ways that deer are relating to wind in general, but there's some, anecdotes around deer going to low spots, like what some people refer to like thermal hubs these days. Imagine like a low bottom with a bunch of points dropping down into it. The idea being during the rut, a buck can cruise down in some place like this where all the scent pools from all the ridges and points around it, and that's a place to very quickly scent check larger areas or something like that. Have you seen deer using that, thermals in that kind of way before?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I don't get into the weeds on it quite to that degree, to where sometimes I think, and I think the advent of all the different mapping programs out there, OnX or DeerCast or HuntStand, whichever the one, sometimes I think that off season's a long period of time, and we spend so much time creating theories in our mind off of the 3D topography and everything. But in reality, it might not necessarily be that way once you get out there and watch the deer's activity. So I don't know that I've ever witnessed that per se, in terms of where I processed it and thought, well, that buck just went to the bottom where all these points came together because that was a thermal pool, Perhaps he did, right? But one thing's for sure, as the earth cools down and he's low in topography, he's gonna get more scenting done than if he's up on a ridge.
All right, let's talk about some more wind theories then. There's some more theories, and there's a lot about wind. Mm-hmm. You have some that I've heard you share over the years. I'd like to review a few of those.
Sure.
Changes in wind direction. We just had one that happened where there was a bunch of south winds and we just got a big north, a big shift. How have you seen changes in wind direction impact a deer population in their movement?
Well, again, it goes back to what I was talking about. A lot of these things accompany other weather factors. So it's cold front, and we went from a south to a north. So was it the wind direction switch, or was it the ushering in of high pressure? Was it the wind speed switch? A lot of these things work collectively. What I do notice with regularity is where deer bed based on wind direction, and especially with wind speed. I always think back to a field I used to have on this giant ridge in Iowa, and it was about the size of I'm going to say 3 or 4 football fields together. It was a big field, 5 acres. It ran north to south as true as it could possibly run. And I had a blind on one end and a blind on the other with access in both ways that worked quite well. But when the wind was out of the north and I was on the south end of the field, all the deer were always on the north end of the field. And then when the wind was opposite and I was on the other end of the field, they were where I was on the north wind. So I never forgot that. And I was like, how do they know where I'm at? I was younger, right? It wasn't that they knew where I was at. It was that the wind direction switched where they were bedding for that day. Wind speed will also do that to them. I always think in terms of how high is the wind speed, how low do you think they'll bed in topography to get out of that wind? How low is the wind speed? The bed all of a sudden expands in terms of the options for a buck. So it's more about where they'll bed when it comes to a wind switch, in my opinion. And that also differs early season and late season when it's food predominant activity versus the rut when the activity is throughout the day. So bedrooms can pop up literally anywhere during the rut. This time of the year, they're much more defined. Early season, late season, they're much more defined. There are much more opportunities for a deer to bed with security this time of the year than late season when all the leaves are off the trees. They're seeking thermal units. So it changes as the leaves come off the trees. It changes with temperature. It changes with what phase the deer are in at the time of the year. So some of the scouting that you do, it's always great, I think, for anyone to take lots of notes, and any little thing they learn that day, keep track of it, because I could, as I'm sitting here today, bet you $100 that same occurrence is going to happen to you in future years. And that's how you end up eliminating a lot of mistakes and things that you did that did not succeed, and start doing more of the things where you had success based on those notes and learning. It's so nuanced. It's impossible to remember it all, but it is possible to note it all and then read through those notes in the off season.
I want to unpack a little bit, a few things you said there in a little bit more detail. One was wind speed impacts on bedding. And I want to repeat what you said and make sure I got this right. Higher wind speeds, you typically see bucks bedding, or deer in general, bedding lower in topography to get out of that high wind speed. Is that correct?
Or at least in a fold within topography to relieve themselves of that wind speed. I see that a lot. When it's heavy winds, I'm going to a bottom somewhere that afternoon and oftentimes that morning.
Okay. But a low wind speed, they'll bed wherever. That's not as much of an impact. It's a little
more expanded, if you will. And again, it's not always. These are tendencies I've seen with deer.
Now, to direction, you mentioned that on that one big north-south field you described there, you saw them bed on one side of it with a certain wind direction and the other side of it with the other direction. What do you attribute that to? I know you mentioned it's like where they're bedding, but why are they bedding on one side or the other? Do you think it was because, or is it your assumption that it's because of the way they wanted to approach the feeding? Like, did they say, well, I'm going to bed on this side because for me to use this wind to go out and feed, I need to come wet this way? Or is it no, because when I want to go into my bedding area, I want to smell my bedding area as I move into it, so I bed here?
It's about when they bedded. It's about the morning. What was the wind doing this morning, and where might they have bedded? So it's more about using the wind of a morning when they're going and approaching their secure area than it is where the wind's at when you go in. If you think back, well, why is he in that bed? When did he get there? Wait a minute. What were the conditions when he went there? And then that'll help you pan through that.
So how do you think a buck moves into his bedding area? What have you seen? I know you've watched bucks go into their bedrooms before and maybe even seen them bed down. How have you seen them use wind? Because there's a lot of theories, there's a lot of beliefs that, they always do this, they always do that. What have you seen?
I've noticed a couple different things. One thing's for sure, as a buck ages, he moves much more slowly through the topography and much more careful, and he doesn't move as far from a linear standpoint. You take a buck that's 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, chances are he's not moving very far. His bedrooms are very distinct. And if you can get lucky enough to get a pattern on a deer in previous seasons that's putting some age on, chances are you can make plans the following year to take advantage of that buck's weaknesses. And by that, I mean, he's not going to move very far. His home core, to me, just shrinks right up when they get to 6, 7, 8 years old. They know where they've been safe in the past, and they eliminate problems just like we try to eliminate problems while we're hunting them. They're eliminating problems of coyotes and tractors and cars, and they know where security is. So that's one thing I've noticed. Younger deer seem to be a little bit more random. A 2-year-old or 3-year-old buck, you watch them, watch their actions when they come out into a field or when they're walking through the topography. They're a little bit more careless than an older buck, and they move at a much faster speed because it's kind of like I think a pet lab or a pet dog. If you watch them through their life, by the time they're old, they're not moving a whole heck of a lot. Yeah. And they're spending a lot more time in their bed laying down than they are running after a ball that you're throwing off the porch, So I think whitetails do the same thing as they age. They just don't move as far or as fast. But if you can find where they're at and have an access point in and out with the right weather conditions, you can kill it. It's exactly what we did last night. Wade killed that deer for that exact reason.
Yeah. Have you seen them, mature bucks in particular, have you seen them use the wind when going into their bedroom in a particular way? Like some folks will say they'll always wind check their bed before heading in, or that they will J-hook into their bedroom. Have you seen anything like that that's somewhat consistent?
Certainly, and I see them do it more frequently later in the year when you take this time of the year, they're not quite as spooked up, but all of a sudden you put coyote pressure, hunter pressure, gun seasons, all these things occur. They get much more skittish, and they're much more alert throughout the day than they are right now. Summer patterns leading into early fall, they're a little bit more lackadaisical. They haven't been pressured very heavily yet in terms of the hunting pressure. But by the time you get to the end of the year, they're wary and on alert and checking every wind, and their nose is up in the air, and they'll go way out of their way to check a bedroom or check another buck, check other does. So they don't have to do that quite as much right now because their interest is different now. It's just more about food. Of course, they're always interested in staying safe. But once they get through the rut and they've been using that sniffer each and every day, you see them use it more often than you do right now.
Yeah. What about when things switch up midday? So they choose where they're going to bed for the day based on what the wind and thermals are doing at that time as they go in there and they make sure they're safe. But then if there's like a midday significant wind switch, like this cold front coming through, like for me, it's hitting late morning. It's actually hitting today as we're talking. It was southerly winds this morning. And then around like 9, 10 o'clock, all of a sudden the storm pushed through, the temperature started falling, and it switched to a north. So is that going to do something funky to the deer today? Where they bedded with the south, but for this evening, all of a sudden they have a north. How have you seen that impact things?
I don't think so. I think in certain situations like that, the weather takes over. Their urge to go feed is still going to be there, and they use the wind as they navigate through the terrain more so than they follow, go into the wind all day long. So I think they might circle a little bit to catch a wind favor, or they might enter slightly different than they would have if the wind had stayed the same. But it's not a huge difference. I think they're still going to enter in their entry trails and exit those, exit trails.
Have you ever seen bucks shift midday where they bed with a wind change? I've heard some anecdotes of people seeing bucks that bedded on one side of a ridge with X wind, and then the wind switched, and then, soon after that wind switched, the buck stood up and moved 50 yards over and rebedded in a better wind position. Is that
certainly wind can do that? Some sort of interference like a coyote can do that, or a dog. And more often than not, when you see that buck on your trail cameras that's up and walking at 12:30 and nothing else is walking, I think it's oftentimes something scurried around, got him up, or the sun aspect changed, and therefore he's like, I'm going to rebed. So of course they'll rebed based on wind speed, wind direction, sun, other things that get them up and cause them to rebed. Are they going to bed a lot further away? Might be 50 yards, might be 200 yards, it might not be that far, but yeah, they certainly switch beds throughout the day. I think sun
Okay.
does it as much as anything.
Movement. You just start talking about how they kind of use the wind partially throughout their day as they're moving. And I know this is different from it's they use wind in one way during the rut, and then maybe it's a little bit differently pre and post. But let's first talk about this time of year, either early season or late season, when it is basically a bed to food existence for these deer. How do you see them using the wind as they move in the evening to go feed? Because again, there's like all of these. Oftentimes, people try to put a rule on a deer, like, "Hey, they're always going to travel with the wind in their nose or quartering to their face." But then I've seen bucks head out into a food source with the wind at their tail on occasion. But
Absolutely.
I'm curious, are there any trends that you've seen enough that impact how you hunt them in the evenings? Given like, hey, X wind, that means they're probably going to come from this direction, or something like that.
Uh, in the fact that I'm very disciplined with where I'll go on what wind speed and wind direction. When I'm at a spot that I've had for a long time, I often see them doing the same things. If that makes sense, because I'm in there on the same conditions. Otherwise, I wouldn't be
Ah,
going to that spot. So
right.
I don't frequent spots very often in um, conditions that don't favor my access in and out, and then while I'm sitting there. So I've already honed through that. Uh, Otherwise, I wouldn't be going there. So I think as you sit and watch a spot, if you can hunt it on a variety of different wind directions, you might start to see, oh, that's the direction I need to be here in, because they're bedding 100 yards off the field, not 50 off the field, because that bedding area is a little bit more secure in this wind speed. I also think the weather that morning plays a huge part in how far off the food they bed. So it's more about uh, weather conditions in general. How well did they move this morning? I think through that all the time. So are they up because it's great weather, beautiful high pressure, they're meandering, going all over the place, and suddenly they've bedded 300 yards off the field, as opposed to just a scenario where you're hunting a feed field of an evening, as opposed to it's hot, they're not moving very far, and they plop down 50 yards off the field.
Mm.
So I think through what did he experience this morning? You know, is he bedded quite a ways off, or do I feel like he bedded just off this field based on the weather conditions? For us here this morning, we had a high pressure morning, deer on their feet all morning. There's no telling where they ended up bedding. It's not going to be nearly as defined as what we've seen the previous 2 weeks when it was hot, movement was at a minimum, and they weren't moving very far between bed and feed. I think that as weather improves and we see more deer movement, you also see a scattering approach of the bedding, because they're just lingering longer. They're acorning, they're hitting mast, they're checking does, they're starting to check scrapes, and suddenly they're starting to move a little bit more. So I see that as much as I do, wind speed affecting it.
You hear a lot about people. I was just reading a book for another podcast I'm working on by Roger Rothar, and
What's the name of the
he
book?
described it was Whitetail Magic, and it was either that or In Pursuit of Trophy Whitetails, one of the two. But he described in that book, and I've heard many people echo this, that the best setup to kill a mature buck is one where the wind is almost wrong for you
Right,
and almost right
right,
for
for
the
the deer.
deer, right? So how do you try to do you try to do that, and what does that look like? Because what I'm trying to get at here is how you go about determining how the wind is right for that buck.
You know, I read that book in 1986 or 87, and Roger Rothar and Gene Winsel really had a huge influence on myself and Terry when we first started. We first started Drew Outdoors in 1989. And I read through those books, and I had yellow markers, right, where I was going through and making uh, comments in there and highlighting certain things that I wanted to remember. And they were huge influences to Terry and I. But the one thing that I read in Roger's book, and I don't know if you've gotten to that point, about how he would only go into a stand after like 8 a.m. Have you gotten to that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I've read them all the way through. So yes, I remember that.
Okay. So that always, I got the premise, but I didn't get the premise. Like, man, I'm of a different school, and not saying Roger's wrong, because he was killing deer, giant deer in Ohio and Illinois back before anybody else got to making this popular. He and Gene were way ahead of the time in their theories and the things they wrote about. And much of it is golden standard, right? But that one, I was always like, man, I want to see the woods wake up, and I want to have a position where I'm safe that first hour or two. And how many giants have you seen walking through the first 15, 20 minutes,
Oh, yeah.
as opposed to walking in when many of the deer start to get up and be on their feet. So I always felt like that didn't detail the way I wanted to hunt, especially of a morning. So in terms of the winds, just kind of right for me and kind of right for the deer and that type of stuff, I'm so disciplined, and it goes back to the answer I gave just a little bit ago. I want the wind perfect for me. I want the winds and the thermals perfect for me as I go in and go out, because there's such a variance with wind cones. Because if you look at it and you go, okay, I'm going to hunt this on a northwest wind, when in reality, you can spread that out to 90 degrees or greater, because everything on the south side and everything on the east side is probably out that day, depending on the speed. There's certain speeds that are optimal for us, and there's certain speeds that are optimal for the deer in terms of when they'll actually move the most. So I want the wind perfect for me, and I'll take my chances on what the deer are doing, because they'll move through the topography, and they'll switch course over one scent that they catch, so it puts whitetails into the always and never category. And I just like to protect myself, because I know this: if I'm not getting detected, I have a much greater chance of success that day.
Yeah. It brings to mind another quote from Roger's book, which I loved. And I'm going to paraphrase the quote. The quote was so good. I wish I could perfectly quote it, but he said something along the lines of, the mature whitetail buck will always do exactly whatever he damn well pleases. Basically, it was coming down to, we always try to put a always and never on a whitetail buck. He's always going to do this. He'll always do that. But there is there's no way to actually do that. He's just going to do whatever he feels like doing in that moment. And oftentimes it will surprise us. And you have to have a certain amount of respect for that randomness to a degree.
You do. And it's why I always talk about having the access in and out and the conditions perfect for me. Like, I want it to where I don't get detected. Because if you can go without letting deer detect you, you're going to be a very successful whitetail hunter. I mean, that's probably the takeaway from today's episode. Do everything you can to never let them know you're there. If you can do that, you're going to succeed a lot more than you're going to fail.
Yeah. A little teaser.
And then let the deer damn well do what they want, right? And sooner or later, you're going to get your shot.
I was going to say a little teaser. Next week's episode for Wired to Hunt is going to be basically a book report on Roger's books. I'm going to do a deep dive into the lessons of Roger Rothar that, today's generation of hunters doesn't know anything about him, except for the fact that people like you or Don Higgins or Bill Winke mention his name, and all of us of my generation are like, who's this guy? Why do they keep bringing him up? So I went and found old copies of his books from used booksellers, got the books, have tried to get everything I can from them, and I'm going to try to share all that with today's generation. So that's next week on this podcast.
You should do one on Gene Wetzel's stuff too, from back in that same era. Gene and Roger were both cranking out incredible information. I always loved the chapter of Gene's book. I think it was One Man's Whitetail. And he talked about the power of thinking so positively that he was able to make the deer get up and move, because he would think about a buck coming through at 8:30, and that's all he would think about the entire morning. And then boom, a buck would walk by at 8:30. Like, that chapter fascinated me. But in reality, I think the moral of that story was just the power of a positive attitude and being ready for something to happen in any second, man. That's another thing I think happens to guys so often, whether they're on their cell phone, whether they got other thoughts in their mind. Like if you get home from a hunt and you're not fairly mentally fatigued, you probably weren't quite focused as much as you should be, especially during the rut where the sits are longer. Like that mental focus and mental preparedness, being ready for the moment at any second because they are fleeting. When a big buck's on his feet and comes by, think about the times you've seen them. They don't linger. You don't give you many shots. You better be ready for the one chance you're going to get, or you're going to blow it every single time. Man, they're tough.
That is the truth.
They're going to blow it every time. So that mental preparation is, and we talked about that in that podcast you mentioned earlier. So you got to make sure you're a little fatigued when you get done hunting.
So a couple more quick questions on these little wind questions I have. I think that based on everything you've said so far, that you would say mostly no to the question I'm about to ask you. But I want to confirm, because I'm always thinking to myself, I'm always trying to predict where this buck's going to go on a given day or hunt. We'll say for an evening hunt. And if I have like a best guess of where I think he's probably better, like I will tell you exactly my scenario for tonight's hunt. My target buck has got a little zone that I think is probably the zone he beds in the most. Handful of acres, couple acres, 2-3 acres. I know he's not there all the time, but if I had to say, my best guess that he might be on most days, I'd say he's probably bedded somewhere around here. But then he has food sources to the north, to the south, and to the west. And I'm trying to think, okay, where do I think he's going to go tonight? And I'm oftentimes trying to think, in some cases, it's the same food source. He could go north to a cornfield, he could go south to a cornfield, or he could go west to a cornfield. There's acorns in between, and then there's a green food plot in 2 different directions too. So he's got a lot of options in any different direction. And I'm trying to sit here and think, well, how do I predict which one of those directions he's going to go today? And I oftentimes find myself trying to use wind to help me predict that. Or I wonder, can wind help me predict that? Have you ever found the wind direction be able to help you predict whether he will go north, south, west, east, etc.? And we've kind of talked around this a lot, but I guess I'm wondering explicitly, does the wind direction ever help you predict if a buck will go to food source A or food source B or anything like that?
I think it does, but not every day or all the time. But I think it can be one of those factors that helps you tilt the odds in your favor. There's a lot of factors that equal success. If you look back on your successful hunts and you break down everything you did, you go, what all went right? Boom, 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 boom. And anticipating where a buck might move to a source, I think it's kind of like blackjack. If you always stay on 16 or always hit on 16, right? It depends how you play the game. I'm pretty consistent in the fact that if I go the theory, I'm going to go with it over and over and over and over again and stack the odds in my favor to where it succeeds. So in other words, if you think on the north, I'm assuming your wind switched out of the north, that he's going to use that wind and come out the, one side or the other. And my guess is he's probably not going to he'll squirt out the side if I had to guess, because I think they often scent check stuff on their way as opposed to scent checking the same thing all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my anticipation would be he's going to squirt out the side as opposed to squirting it going north right into the wind. That would be my guess, because I think he's going to scent check as he's combining that with his ears and his eyes. We talk about their nose a lot, but they're good at seeing and hearing, and they depend on those 2 senses as much as they do their nose. And I think that's why when you try to bottle all this up and go, what's he doing in certain winds? Well, what can he see in that terrain and what can't he see? How high is the wind speed? How low is the wind speed? In other words, how well is he able to hear, or how much might he not hear based on the wind speed? So those other 2 senses, it's really a trifecta in terms of what he's using to live on a day in and out basis. And he has to use all 3 of those every single second of the day, year round. So it's not just wind. But if I had to guess, partially he's going to use the wind and go out one side of that block or not. That'd be my guess.
I hope you're right.
Just for that's the way you're playing it. Good.
Yeah, that's the way I'm playing it. I'm hoping that you're right, because I can hunt just west of his bedding area, where my wind, I'll be just a little bit on the southern side of it and just west of it. There's a big scrape that he's been already coming out and hitting pretty frequently right off the edge of that bedding area. Is on his way to basically this spot I can hunt. He will pass through an open oak stand with a bunch of acorns in the ground. He could then hit a green food plot just past that or a cornfield right next to it. So I think there's a strong chance of him wanting to use that crossing wind as you described it. And hopefully either the acorns, the green, or the corn will be something he's interested in, and he'll be pinching by in a little stand of timber back there that I can get into uniquely because of the rain and the wind today is the only day I think I could safely get this close to him. And so I'm going to take a little bit of an aggressive swing to get in there because every other day coming up is going to be crunchy and loud anyways. So it's a kind of a one-time shot I think I have here for a while with this cold front. So we'll see.
I think that's very wise, and something you might do or consider is looking at previous. I assume you have a little history with this deer from last year.
Yep.
Look at some of those nights he went that way. Go into DeerCast Past, which is a new feature for us in DeerCast, and go.
I love it.
What were the conditions the days he did that? Because DeerCast Past you go in and enter the date that you're looking for. You can enter any date going back 3 years, and it'll tell you the conditions that day. And then all of a sudden you match up where he's going and with a condition. And when that repeats, trust me, they'll do the same thing. They're very repetitive and redundant from that standpoint, if nothing else affects them.
Yeah. I love the fact that you guys added that. That's been something that I've wanted for years for you guys to have. Since you in particular, you and Terry have been such advocates for looking back in the past and so I've had to always use the Weather Underground website to find this stuff. Now that you guys have it there in the app, I'm a happy camper.
It's a lot easier.
So thanks for adding that.
It's a lot easier because you put the data and it spits out all the factors for that day. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's terrific. Real quick, wind use by deer during the rut, either using wind to check doe bedding and feeding areas and or scrapes. Those are three different things that you oftentimes hear people saying, well, deer will use the wind to check one of those three things: does on food, does in a bed, or a scrape. How important has that been for you when setting up, and what are the specifics of what you've actually seen?
It's very important because I think they probably use that sniffer a little bit more than they do any other time. It's like a dog trying to find a rabbit, or a blood tracking blood tracking dog trying to find a deer. And I learned so much about deer by hunting and tracking with Tracker John and his bloodhounds, and just watching how they work the terrain and figure out the scent, not necessarily in the wind or the thermals, but scent that's on a twig or a branch. And I see deer doing a lot of the same things that I witnessed those dogs doing as they're trying to track a deer. So when it comes down to them this time of the year, they're a little bit lazier, a little bit slower. They're going to the food source, then they're coming back. As we get into late October and their mind switches, their attention span switches, they start using that nose so much more. It's a totally different ballgame. It's like hunting a different species, if you will, than the one you're hunting now. It's one of the reasons we did 13, because there's so many different light switch events where the deer just change drastically, their demeanor and what they're doing and how they're interacting. And I think as you get into the rut, it's all about that nose and all about scent checking and covering ground and trying to jump that rabbit, if you will. A couple things I've watched deer do consistently. Number one, you get into the rut and you see all that movement at 7:35 to about 7:30 to about 8:45 or so, 9 o'clock, and the rest of the herd beds down. It gets a little slow, and then boom, the mature bucks are up on their feet. And then they're zigzagging all those bedding areas. They're checking all those trails. They wait for all the other deer to bed down, and then they go check those bedding areas and check what just occurred. If they're without a doe, they're looking for a doe, and they're going to go find one. And they're smart enough to wait until the does are all down, and then they go check them. I've watched them do that. The other thing, they're creatures of edge. And I love hunting edge, whether it's a thick cover inside of a big block of timber, or it's the hardwood edge on the downside of a bedding area. The same place we want to be is often where they want to be, but you got to be a little further downwind than they are, and just watch through time. Where do these deer downwind this bedding area? How far are they? Are they just inside in the transitional zone, Or are they out here on this field edge? Can I mow a path that perhaps incentivizes them to use the edge? Could I put a path just inside the woods to incentivize movement there? And through time, you'll catch how they're using the terrain and the wind during certain phases of the rut. And then you can be just a little further downwind than they are. Same thing with scrape lines. Same thing with just about everything. They'll downwind everything throughout the rut. So you want to be on that same downwind side, so it does work. But you can't be so far downwind you're out of the game. Like I always felt like during the rut, if I could fool 75% of the noses and get caught by about 25%, I was pretty close to where I need to be within the terrain to take advantage of and kill a big buck. Sometimes that guy's going to be in the 25%, but oftentimes he's in that 75%. Because one thing about being caught by a deer this time of the year, I think it is far more detrimental to your overall hunt right now to get caught by a doe, dominoes everything back. It's really bad in December, man. There's so many deer. It doesn't take much to convince the whole herd to get up and domino back. But during the rut, you can spook a deer, and 10 minutes later, because they're covering more ground, a new deer comes along, especially if there's wind speed where it's covering a lot of what's going on. So I always relied on that 75-25 rule when I'm rut hunting. You know, if I have a few deer get downwind of me, I'm not that tore up about it because it tells me I'm right on the edge of where I want to be.
That's really helpful. I found myself many a time standing in the woods debating exactly which tree to pick and thinking, oh, geez, this is the right spot to be. But, you know, there's a 20% chance that one of them might slip back on that one spot there, and then back and forth between, like, do I need to be absolutely windproof but off the X a little bit, or right on the X but be a little bit exposed? And it sounds like you're willing to take a little exposure to make sure you're on the X.
During the rut type setups. This time of the year, I want 0% because it's going to ruin the whole hunt.
Yeah.
During November, call it October 25th through Thanksgiving, that month, I'm a little bit more, I'm getting in their face a little bit more. I've had pretty good success getting in there a little tighter. Now, I don't want to be right dead center in the middle of all the activity, or there's deer blowing you all day. But if I have, you know, if you see 5 deer and one of them catches you and the other 4 don't, I think you're probably in pretty good spot.
All right. Last wind question of the day. Talked a bunch about deer getting downwind to you, and you alluded to this earlier, but one of the risks of calling is that you might cause a deer to downwind you because, as you mentioned, oftentimes that's what they do. They hear something they're interested in, and then they want to circle downwind of it. Given that, how do you think about wind and that tendency to downwind you when you're trying to call out a buck? How do you account for that?
The older I get, the less I call, but the more success I have when I'm calling. So I'm choosing my darts, right? I won't throw a dart at him until I know that he's in the right mood, the right position, and I've got the right area for him to come and approach my stand. Oftentimes, it's on a day where the weather is ideal. They're in a better mood those days, and they're more likely to respond to a call. And the lighter I call, I used to get out there and bang those antlers, and every 30 minutes I'd try to get them, you know, is there a buck that's come within ear range? And a boom, they'd circle way downwind because they're trying to figure out who's fighting. And then I don't rattle a terrible amount anymore. I do a lot of soft grunts. Snort wheeze is probably my go-to. I've called more deer in with a snort wheeze than any other call. It's kind of that little warning shot you could give a deer and kind of play on his ego a little bit and see if he comes over there to check you out. You know, decoying is kind of the same theory. But I don't call a lot. But if I see the right buck in the right position, I will try him. And I generally have pretty good success.
So what's the right position to make sure that they don't wind you? Does it have to be like exactly upwind of you?
Near about straight upwind with a decent path for him to get to me. If he's at my 90, I ain't even considering it, you know, unless he's really in a good mood. You know, if he looks like he's ready to fight at that second, I'll hit him a little bit and hope that he comes straight to my tree. Or if it's a really mature deer, that is the difference. Like if it's it depends on the population dynamics in the area, but if you know there's 2 or 3 monsters in the area or really mature deer, and then there's a 3 or 4-year-old that you'd still shoot, chances are the 3 or 4-year-old, if he hears a call, he's got that other big bully deer or those other big shooters on his mind, he's not coming straight to you.
Mm,
Whereas if you
yeah.
see the big bully deer, he might come straight to you because he's the king of the area. So it depends on the population dynamics in the area as well. I've seen herds where there are no big mature deer. Best deer in the herd's a 3-year-old, and he'll come straight to you. But if there's some big ones out there, that's on the back of his mind because chances are he's already run into him, and chances are he already knows his level in the pecking order.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I feel like you've armed me as always with a few new ideas, a lot of new ideas, and things to just continue to stew on, which I will be doing today after slipping in during this rain and setting up right next to a big buck's bedroom for a early October strike. Taking an early swing given this cold front. So we'll see if I've got a good story to share with you or not in a couple
days. It sounds
days.
like you're in the right place. I hope you kill him. Do you have cell cams in that area? Do you know he's in that bedroom?
I do. He's been, I have daylight or like just off the edge of daylight photos of him 5 days in October already. So 5 out of the last 7 days, I've had a daylight of him in this zone. Not like all of them. I think 2 or 3 of those were on the edge of that bedroom. And then 2 of them were in food sources just, outside of it. Yeah, so he's definitely in that zone.
So he's right there somewhere. I mean, if he's not on a walkabout, he should be close this evening, whether he'll daylight or not. You do have a late rising moon. Last night was the last rising moon that I felt like was optimum. The later it rises as we go into the full moon, I find the later that they move. So it won't surprise me if he's a touch late for you this evening. I hope he's not, but last night was the last really good night. Tonight's not bad. It rises, I think, close to about 7 p.m. So it's not terrible.
Yeah, I would have typically hunted him not as close to his bedroom as I'm going to get tonight. I had hunted him closer to the food source he's been hitting the most, but I just got to thinking, man, with this cold weather and the fact that I have this one rainy, windy day, this is the only day I could try to get closer to him. Otherwise, there's no way I could do it. I'd be so loud to be impossible. So my thought was, why don't we try one time to get a little bit closer in there, right where it's happening, where these pictures have been that I wouldn't have been able to get any other day in October so far. And looking at the forecast, I don't see any other days I could try that. So maybe take advantage of this unique set of circumstances and it, as it does, probably doesn't work out because they're deer and they're going to do what they damn well please, but maybe.
I hope you kill him. Send me a picture when you do.
I will try, Mark. Before I let you go, there are a number of cool new things with the DeerCast app that you guys have been working on. You touched on DeerCast Past, which I was so excited about. I had to just text you like in pure joy the other day. I was so happy when I saw that. Yeah. But, can you tell us about anything else new with the app or anything else with
One of the other cool things I think is it lays out the information just from an organizational standpoint. We now have the list view where you can see all 14 days, boom, boom, boom. And you can, like this prediction last night, we've been waiting for 2 weeks for it because we could see it out there at the tail end and day by day it would get closer. And, it said slow all the way up to yesterday. And what do you know, Wade kills this giant. So that list view, I think, helps you plan your schedule a little bit better. Like, there's my green out there in about, 10 days. I got to make sure I'm available right then as opposed to paging through it. So I do like that. The 3D, topography that we put into our maps is fantastic. I'm still a huge fan of the rain stations. I want to know how much rain I got. The wind checker, I think, is the best one out there in the industry. Put it on your spot and it'll show you what the wind's doing. And the wind cones, how they change with the wind speed. All the other little bells and whistles. It's amazing. DeerCast is as accurate as it's ever been. It's as useful as it's ever been. And now with DeerCast Past, I mean, and of course the ability to help you when you need it the most, the tracking, DeerCast Track. I mean, there's just nothing else like it. Like Terry and I sat down and we were like, what do we want to solve for hunters? Like, we're deer hunters. How do we solve these problems? And that's what DeerCast is, just a bunch of problem solving from our minds to put it all together. So it's a very rich app right now in terms of whitetail knowledge.
Yeah, this is not blowing smoke up your tail. I am a real paying user who has benefited from it a lot ever since you guys launched it. So thanks for putting that together because it is a great tool.
I appreciate that, Mark. That's high praise. Thank you.
Of course. Anything else from Drury Outdoors we should know about right now as far as content, YouTube channel, anything else? Or should we just keep on following the YouTube channel and socials?
Absolutely. I mean, of course, our television shows are all airing right now. Bow Madness and Critical Mass and 13. And we're cranking out content right now. The semi-live stuff on deer season 25 is just awesome. Jeff Probst just killed a giant moose up in the Yukon. They're working on our Catch a Dream episode that we had with Will. They're working on my Missouri buck. They will start on Wade's Missouri buck, and all that stuff will come out here in the next few days. So all of it's semi-live. It hits DeerCast first in a very abbreviated version, and then it'll be a full story on YouTube and DeerCast here generally within a week of when the animal hits the ground. So our views are very good. I want to thank everybody that takes the time to watch them, or if you've downloaded DeerCast, thank you so much. And of course, you can always follow us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter as well, or X.
Well, yeah, it's always changing. But hey, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, to have this chat after a late night last night. And I'm guessing you're probably off to another spot tonight with this weather continuing to be pretty good. So thank you for everything, Mark.
Absolutely. I got my mom in camp, and I'm taking mom out tonight. So that's going to be a blast.
Awesome. Well,
she sat here through this whole podcast.
She did?
Yep. There's Lucille.
Oh,
hello.
Hey, Lucille.
It was very educational. It was very interesting, and I hope for the best. But whatever it will be.
This is true. That's amazing.
That's the best. She's 92 and a half. So I mentioned she was 92 the other day. She said and a half. So now I say she's 92 and a half, and we're climbing up into a box blind this evening, 10 foot. She's going to climb that ladder and get up there. She goes through physical therapy daily at where she lives. She's an independent living there in St. Louis, and she makes us all so proud.
That's amazing. Well, I wish you and Lucille amazing luck tonight. I'm so glad you guys are able to do this. I'm glad that the whole family's in town. So have a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate you as always.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yep. You're welcome. Have a great evening. All right, and that's going to wrap it up. Hope you enjoyed this one. I found it fascinating. As I mentioned at the top, go listen to the rest of those Mark Drury episodes. The patterning deer one and the predicting deer movement based on factors like wind, weather, barometric pressure, moon, all that. Those are a couple of my absolute favorites. Truly fascinating. Check them out. Thanks for being here. Good luck on your next hunts. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.